Hey everyone, this is Peter Skov from Music is a Journey. I seem to be coming up with videos a little more frequently than usual these days. This is going to be a relatively short one. I'm responding to a thread put out by a fellow on a YouTube channel going by the name of GMBLR812. That's a capital G MBLR in lowercase, and I guess it basically spells out gambler without the vowels, and then 812. And I heard about his thread through, I think, a couple of other people. Recently, there have just been threads and challenges going on everywhere. I'm guilty of putting out my own. There is one like the top 10 albums that you listen to the most. And for a few days, every time I opened up YouTube on my phone, the first recommended video was somebody I had never seen before in my life doing a video of their top 10. I actually watched a few of them thinking maybe I'll do the same when I realized that nearly all of my top 10 albums I've talked about recently this year or will talk about this year, so never mind. So instead I'm jumping on this one here from Gambler812, and he is asking for 3 not so blind buys. Now I think originally when I heard about it, it was 3 blind buys, and I thought that's super easy because in the 1980s, a lot of the music cassettes I bought were blind buys. My local store had a heavy metal section, and I would just go in and take a look at the album covers and see, you know, what looked good to me. And I'd buy something and take it home, and a lot of those I've actually since replaced and have on CD. Also, I think from about 2012 up until fairly recently, I was exploring music almost ravenously, and a lot of times I would just read a review and think, okay, sounds good, or I'd check the Prog Archives top 100 from the previous year and just pick out the ones that look like they're probably something I'd like and order them. So blind buys is actually, I'd probably say it makes up about 30 to 40% of my music collection. However, this one asked for not so blind buys, which means you actually had a bit of a lead of what to expect. You heard a song, or you read a review or had a recommendation. I'm going to not exactly do it that way because I kind of like the way I was thinking about it before I actually checked on what the absolute, the stated rules were. And another thing is that this is going out to the vinyl community, and I know I have recently connected with a lot of people in the vinyl community, but when have you seen me talk about vinyl? Probably in about 2 or 3 videos. Quite simply, I don't collect vinyl. I don't have a record player. I haven't had access to a record player since, I don't know, 1991 or something like that. So any vinyl I have is just used albums I picked up in the late 80s because they weren't available on cassette or CD at the time. Anyway, let's move on. I wanted actually to pick out about 5, not 3, because there were certain ones that were really important to me. And I think one of them I really want to mention is packed away in a box, and I just really didn't feel like moving tons of stuff to get that one CD out. Under this table here, I've got all these long boxes with about 40 CDs in each, and I think I have about 20 or so boxes, so it's a bit of a problem to pick out one disc. Okay, anyway, so let's get on with it. I guess we'll go back to one of the very first ones. This goes back to around 1982, sometime in 1982, possibly early 83. I was really into AC/DC at the time. I'd heard some Van Halen a little bit. I'd heard some Black Sabbath a little bit. I'd heard some other hard rock stuff, or some, not exactly hard rock, but still pretty cool rock stuff at this time. And I recognized it was guitar-based rock, maybe the harder, heavier stuff that I liked. And a friend of mine said, oh, if you want to hear something heavy, you should check out a band called Judas Priest. I didn't know anything about them. I found out a good friend of mine, his older brother, had a poster of the band on his bedroom wall. That was the only thing I knew, was how they looked. And so I went out to the store and picked up this album on cassette, and I was totally mind blown. I mean, remember, I was used to listening to AC/DC. Still love those old AC/DC albums that I had, but this was just simply a completely different game we're talking about here. The guitar sounds, the riffs, the structures of the songs, the vocals, of course. This was just really something incredible. And Judas Priest, I don't love every album. I don't even have every album, but the albums I like or the songs I like, I really, really love those. Like they're those ones that just get in you and never want to leave you. And this was one of the criteria of the original thread, was that these are albums that you ended up really loving and they're never going to leave your collection. I had this on cassette, I had it on CD, and then I got it on this remastered series. Were there bonus tracks on this one? There are 2 bonus tracks on this one. So the first one is Judas Priest Screaming for Vengeance, which still remains one of my favorite albums of all time. Now, as I said, the local record store did have a heavy metal section, and I would go in and look at the covers. There was a label in Canada called Banzai, which had most of the really cool extreme stuff that was available in Canada. It was on the Banzai label. And I remember I would go in and I would see things like Exodus Bonded by Blood. There's like the evil Siamese twin trying to rip apart from the good Siamese twin. Or Creator albums, which usually had some big muscular beastly thing crushing skeletons. And there were other albums like Hellish Images, or images of like, epic violence or something. And then I found this. And I thought, what the heck is this? There is a kind of, gibbous moon in the sky. What is this album? The lettering looks metal, and it's in the metal section. It's called The Return. I have no idea. The Return of the Moon? I don't know. So I just bought it and brought it home. And, if you know Bathory and if you know this album, this is one that just really blew my socks off. And I talk about this and the Judas Priest one in a video I made about, I don't know, was it a dozen albums that just totally blew my jaw off. This was one of them. Of all the extreme metal I'd heard, there was nothing quite as extreme as this. The vocals were extreme. The guitar sound, the overall quality of the sound on this was extreme. And, when I thought I kind of didn't really have an interest in metal anymore, but I wanted to get some of those old favorites on CD, there was no doubt that I was going to get this. And of course, one of the really eye-opening things was when I finally did return to metal or extreme metal and I started getting to black metal. Boy, did I ever recognize how this band, this album, and actually the album before this really, really set the template for that early second wave of black metal. So Bathory, just one heck of a noisy but incredible album for me. Still hold this in very high regard. Still snooping around in the 1980s then. I talked about this album recently. I hadn't put it back in its box yet. It was just kind of like peeking out here in a stack that's under the table. Thor's Music Hammer recently talked about this one as well, so I thought this was really cool. This is the Royal Court of China. Again, in that metal section at the store. My best friend was totally into the kind of glam metal, hair metal band scene, and I wasn't as deeply interested. I had some of them, not a lot. But I saw this band and I thought, they look like they're a hair metal band, but they look kind of greasy and rough looking rather than all fluffy and covered in cosmetics. So yeah, the Royal Court of China, what kind of a name is that for a metal band? And alright, geared and primed, I picked it up. And it is not a metal album, although there are some pretty heavy riffs in places. It is basically a hard rock album, but man, this is one of these kind of albums I really love because basically there is a lot of variety on here. You get some of these more heavy rockers, you get these kind of lighter ones. They're from Tennessee, so occasionally there's a bit of a country rock feel in the music, which normally I wouldn't like, but it just works for me on this album. And I have always loved this album, and from time to time I'll pick it up and give it a spin, and I'm just reminded how many tracks I really like on this. So this is the Royal Court of China, geared and primed. And that's 3, but I really dearly wanted to mention, actually I could probably mention 10, but one very important album for me is this one here. This is Sloan's debut album, Smeared. Yes, I've talked about it before. I did a history of Sloan just last year, a two-part video. This is their debut album, Smeared, from 1992, right? Yeah, 1992. And it was this time, 1992, I was really looking for new music to get into. I'd come out of my Christian phase, I was looking for new stuff, and I decided I wanted to find out about more Canadian bands, because most of the Christian bands I got into were American except for one. So anyway, I watched a program called Ear to the Ground. It was on CBC, and it was the first time I watched the program, and they introduced this band. And the music that I was hearing in the background was really unlike anything that was in my collection. And I got this album, which was unlike anything I had in my collection. I have actually since watched that program on YouTube, and I recognized that the music that was played in it was partially from the EP that came just around the same time as this, and partially from some tracks that remained as singles or B-sides or obscurities that later on were released digitally decades down the road. But this album here is a very unique one in Sloan's catalog because they came out of the Halifax underground scene with a punk rock pedigree, and then they adopted the My Bloody Valentine sound into theirs around the time that they made this album. So there is a very strong My Bloody Valentine feel to it, but again, you still have a little bit more of a kind of punk hardcore, or at least alternative rock influence as well, that is not quite in with the shoegaze scene, so it's a nice blend of both, I find. So yeah, Sloan has remained one of my favorite bands of all time. I never miss a release of theirs. I pre-order it every time. I have loved pretty much every album. So yeah, there's an album that has stayed with me and a band that has stayed with me. And again, I could mention easily several more, but there's one that's hiding in a box I really got to mention. It is Wobbler, Rites of Dawn. Again, this is an album that I have mentioned a couple of times in the past on this channel. They are a progressive rock band from Norway, and they like to stick to using equipment that it was used between, I think, like 1968 and 1975. They want all their equipment from that time. I don't know if they're still doing that, but that's what I heard way back when I first got into them. Rites at Dawn was their third album, and it is a unique one in their catalog because they haven't done any other album like that. 3 of their other albums have a kind of similar approach, with one like mega epic track, 2 other 10-12 minute tracks, and then a really short like orchestral instrumental. Rites at Dawn starts and ends with an orchestral instrumental that basically take you in and out of the album. And basically it's like you are leaving reality and you are leaving the dream world to enter reality, which is the rest of the Wobbler songs, and then the final track takes you back into the dream world kind of thing. I think that's how it works. And then they have 5 songs running between 7 and 12 minutes of just insane retro prog, retro symphonic prog, just those kind of songs where the music keeps changing and bringing something new. Sometimes you might hear a chorus twice in a song, but there's just so much going on, and I really like music like that. It's complex, it's changing, you never know what's going to happen, so every time they slap down something new and really cool, you are just like, floored once again, and that just happens continuously throughout the album. So Wobbler, Rites of Dawn, I have to mention that. Okay, and that's 5. It's supposed to be 3, and some of these were completely blind. Bathory and Wobbler, I basically just knew Bathory should be metal, Wobbler should be prog. That's all I knew, and I bought them. The others, Royal Court of China, I didn't know either. So yeah, most of them completely blind. So it's not vinyl, and it's not a not so blind buy, so that's why probably I don't really fit the thread exactly, but I thought I'll put in my 2 cents anyway. There you have it, folks. Coming up with a ranking of Led Zeppelin albums for a contest from All the World's a Stage music channel, and then the first 10 albums of Styx will be coming up shortly after that. So hopefully see you in those videos. Thanks everyone for watching. See you around. Bye.